Great, so I think we will get started. So I would like to welcome everybody to our webinar session this morning on advocacy achievements in disability and inclusion, national and international perspectives. And for Dóchas, this is a really exciting event. We have a very active working group, the Disability and International Development Working Group, which is co-chaired by Fergal O'Connell, the CEO of Sightsavers Ireland, and Grace Duffy, who is the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor with Goal Global. And so I suppose the Disability Working Group have been very much at the forefront and leading on this initiative, which will be a series of webinars, hopefully to support you, to support your organisations in the implementation and delivery of your programmes, particularly relating to disability and inclusion. And I'm really happy as well that in today's lineup, we also have the Disability Federation of Ireland joining us. And I think it highlights the importance for us as a sector to not only learn from each other, but also to look outwards, to engage with national counterparts who they themselves are continuously developing their own policy and practices, and see what we can learn from each other as well. So I think it's coming up to Saturday, which is International Day for People with Disabilities. I think this is a really pertinent time to have this webinar. And I hope you'll join me in the participating this morning, and also in really appreciating the work that is being done of the Disability and Working Group to make this happen. So with that, I will hand over to Grace Duffy for the introductions. But I'd just like to mention that we will be recording this session and this will be shared early next week as well. So if there is any of your team members or otherwise who would like to, who are unable to make it this morning, that there will be an online version available that will be shared with you early next week also. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Grace, to get started. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Jane-Ann, for opening our webinar and for getting us moving today. So as Jane-Ann mentioned, my name is Grace Duffy. I work with Goal Global, and I'm currently one of the co-chairs of the Dóchas Disability and International Development Working Group. So as Jane-Ann mentioned, this webinar is actually our first webinar in a series that this working group will be facilitating over the coming months. And today our focus is on advocacy for disability inclusion, and both from the international perspective and a national perspective in Ireland, and looking at the synergies between these and what learning can be shared. So leading our session today, we have two speakers. Our first speaker is Clement Traore, who's the Education Advisor with Plan International in Burkina Faso. And he's going to present on micro advocacy achievements at the community level in relation to inclusive quality education programming in a rural context. He'll also speak about some strategic macro achievements that have been used to inform policy and practice at a national level. Following this, we're going to hear from Dr. Meredith Raley, who is the Policy and Research Officer at the Disability Federation of Ireland. And she's going to talk to us today about their advocacy work in Ireland and many of the topics addressed by the Disability Federation of Ireland, such as poverty and housing, are very similar to issues found in international work. So Dr. Raley will also address what lessons international organisations might be able to take away from the Disability Federation of Ireland's work in Ireland. So as we go through the webinar, you are very welcome to add your questions to the chat, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. You're also most welcome to save your question for the question and answer session and raise your hand and share your question, your comment, or your reflection at that point. But for now, I'll hand over to you, Clement, to get us going with the first presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grace. I think my screen is shared now. So thank you, Grace, and thank you everyone for joining this interesting meeting. I'm really honored and pleased to present this advocacy achievement in disability and inclusion in terms of progress made by Plan International Burkina Faso, and together with the Plan International Island in communities in southwest region of Burkina Faso. So I would like to begin by showing you a brief overview, a brief summary of the latest situation of disability and inclusion in the education system of Burkina Faso. For a long time, there has been a negative social representation of disability, which is often associated with curse. And this is leading to marginalization of children with disability. Let me add that this marginalization is emotional, social, and economic. Furthermore, inclusive education is relatively risky in the official vision of the education system. Imagine that it's only in 2004 that this started. The prevalence of disability in the population is 1.1%, and rural areas have 3 times more people with disabilities than urban areas. This prevalence is 1.5% in the southwest region, where Plan International Island and Plan Burkina Faso are operating. So this local prevalence rate is higher than the national one. In 2002, in the same area, only 54% of children with disability attend school, compared to 76% for other children in the same area. So we can see that it's a higher rate for our region. Now, let's move on to what I call the typical response from Plan International and Plan International Burkina Faso and Plan Island, together with our stakeholders. The acronym EQUIP stands for Education, Quality, Inclusive, Participatory, and the project has operated in 2 phases from 2012 to 2022. Now, what do we want through this project? In fact, I'm succinctly talking about our objectives. So what we want is equitable access to education for all children, inclusive quality education for all, meaningful participation of children and communities, and inclusive education system with change in policy and practice. The main stakeholders of EQUIP projects are composed of project participants, partners, and collaborators. And as you can see, these are local technical department of national education, municipalities, healthcare centers, and social action departments, traditional leaders, local NGOs and disabled people organizations, children organization, and we have specifically school governments. Now, let me present to you a synthesis of our advocacy and disability in education approach.
So it looks like we may have temporarily lost Clement. Clement, I know you're still in the call with us. You can proceed, or if you would like Dóchas to share the slides on your behalf to support the bandwidth, just let us know.
Clement, your microphone is turned off.
Okay.
You're mute. Yeah,
is it okay now?
Go.
So I don't know at which time it was unable for you to follow. So I will go to. Oh.
Would you like me to share the slides?
Sorry, I'm not sharing the screen.
Emma, go back to the slide. You had just moved on to the next slide where you were going to show how this operates. We didn't hear anything from the beginning there. So maybe if you pick up on that, that would be perfect.
Yeah, I think. Is that okay now?
The screen hasn't come through yet for me. Yeah, now you're on slide 1. Progress. The next one again. The next one again. Perfect. There you are. If you'd want to start talking to that slide, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mireille. So our advocacy and disability approach is in this circle, and you can see it presents the 4 articulation of our intervention. The first one in red is the adaptation to local advocacy context. And the green one, organizational and technical capacity building. And then we have advocacy objectives, and to finish the key advocacy activities. I would like to elaborate first on the adaptation to local advocacy context in red color. The chart explains that we do not lead common advocacy process with these communities because it would be too heavy for them.
Clement, if you are still connected, I think we've lost you temporarily once more. So Morgan, I might ask if you might share the slides and we'll see if that helped Clement's connection. Thanks so much.
Is Clement in the call? Sorry, I've lost my...
He's not, but I'm hoping that's just temporary. We might give a moment just to see if he can reconnect.
Everybody. The brilliance and trouble of Zoom.
Absolutely.
Getting to hear from people from Burkina Faso and yet not always having the connection on our side with the screen sharing and the slides. I'll keep an eye out.
If Clement cannot step back in,
Clement is back in the call.
He is in, great, because I was going to say I'd assist, but I wouldn't be able to do anything like what he could do. He's there. Clement? Clement, can you hear us?
Thanks again to everyone who's joined us. What we might do, Grace Fergal, is perhaps Meredith, we could move on to your presentation. Deirdre, if you could let Clement know in the chat that we can come back to
okay, perfect.
the presentation afterwards, and that I will be able to share the slides. Is that okay with you, Meredith?
Yep, that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
All right, if you can stop sharing, I'll put you up. So just give me 2 seconds to get mine up. Hopefully my connection's stable enough. So you should see my PowerPoint. If at any point it stops moving, somebody just please yell something at me so that I know. So yeah, I'm just going to share some quick summary of DFI's own work in Ireland and look at some of the parallels. As Grace said in the introduction, a lot of the work DFI does in Ireland is very similar to what might be done abroad. We have a lot of problems in Ireland around very basic issues like poverty and housing. So I'll be talking a lot about our work on those and what we've learned from doing that in Ireland. So to let you know, DFI is the Disability Federation of Ireland. We're an umbrella body and we represent around, it changes, 120 disability organizations throughout the Republic of Ireland. So we, in addition to representing organizations, we also do a lot of advocacy work. We advocate for a fairer and more equal society for people with disabilities in Ireland. And we carry out work at the local, national, European, and international level. So while we are mostly a national organization, I'll be focused on our national work today, we do some international work as well. So DFI hopes for a society where people with disabilities are fully included in all aspects of society. We work with our members and local activists and government to implement the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities and to advocate for that equal participation. We work to make sure that our member orgs are also involved in advocacy and are also involved in the implementation of the UN CRPD within Ireland. So as I said, we do some international work, just to give you a brief idea of what kind of international work DFI is involved in. We are a member, we're Ireland's representative on the European Disability Forum, or EDF, and we're also a member of the European Association of Service Providers to People with Disabilities, or EASPD, which is a bit of a mouthful, but those are kind of the two main organizations at the EU level working on disability issues. We also lobby on the European level. We engage with MEPs, we attend EU level disability events, and we have done some work on the international level at the Conference of State Parties for the UN CRPD and putting in a few small submissions to the UN. So while we are mostly national, we do keep our hand in on the international level as well. So I'm going to look at sort of three issues that DFI works on in Ireland today. Poverty and employment, which are obviously very linked, housing, and the UN CRPD, or the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So poverty and employment, I put these together because they are very linked, particularly in a country like Ireland. So in Ireland, generally employment is seen as the answer to poverty. People can lift themselves out of poverty with jobs. But if you have a disability in Ireland, it's really not that simple. Ireland has one of the highest poverty rates among people with disabilities in the entire EU. According to some of the most recent EU data, a number of people with disabilities in Ireland who are at risk of poverty is 37.8%. That puts Ireland about 10% higher than the EU average and puts Ireland on par more with Eastern European countries like Romania and Bulgaria than with our Western European peers. So where they have the highest rate of poverty and at risk of poverty in Western Europe. And having a disability in Ireland actually costs a fair bit of money. This is something that the Department of Social Protection studied fairly recently. They commissioned a report. And the report came out that different disabilities cost different amounts, obviously. But on average, a disability in Ireland can cost you between 8,000 and 12,000 euros a year, just to account for the cost of your disability. The cost of extra equipment, the cost of therapies, all of those, they all add up. And the disability allowance by itself annually pays only 10,816. So for many people, their disability allowance isn't even covering the cost of having their disability in the first place, which makes people far more reliant on family members, on other forms of government aid, and much less able to live a fully independent life. You can imagine you can't really pay rent if all of your money is going to pay for extra equipment or extra therapy. And so, yeah, so poverty is, as I said, a huge problem for people with disabilities in Ireland. Generally, as I said, the solution to poverty would be seen as employment. Unfortunately, Ireland also has the lowest employment rates among people with disabilities in the EU. So the EU average is 50% of adults with disabilities will be in employment. In Ireland, it is 30% of adults with disabilities in employment, putting us well below the EU average. And that number hasn't budged more than a few tenths of a percent since Ireland left our last recession. Leaving that recession did not in any way improve employment for people with disabilities. It remained at extremely low levels throughout the subsequent recovery and boom. So it's really been a recovery and a time of prosperity that's left people with disabilities largely behind in many ways. So yeah, these are two issues that DFI puts a lot of work into. For years, actually, one of DFI's main goals has been to raise awareness of the cost of disability, especially compared to what people are paid in disability allowance. And I'll talk a bit about that because that is one of our advocacy wins. We're on the Department of Social Protection's Disability Consultative Forum. We're on several committees that meet around these issues. The Community and Voluntary Pillar. We put the cost of disability in our pre-budget submissions every single year. We attend pre-budget forums every single year and raise the issue. We've raised the issue with the Oireachtas. Most recently, we raised issues of social protection and poverty with the new Joint Oireachtas Committee on Gender Equality. Because obviously, as you can imagine, issues around poverty, caring, helping people with disabilities who can't lead independent lives have a disproportionate impact gender-wise, in that it's more likely to be mothers and women who give up employment time to provide care and to provide extra assistance. And so it has impacts on families outside of the person with disability. We've raised the issue through our policy networks and through our work with mainstream poverty groups. We put in submissions on the Reasonable Accommodation Fund, the Roadmap for Social Protection, asking that these take into account issues of poverty and employment. And we have even met with the EU Commission on the matter, given that Ireland is so far behind other EU countries on these issues. And I will talk about some of the wins we've gotten out of that after I go through other issues. So we also work on housing. Now, those of you who work in Ireland know that Ireland is in the middle of a housing crisis and has been for some time. And the housing crisis is, again, even worse for people with disabilities. So it's harder for people to find houses. There's more homelessness. There's also more hidden homelessness, people with disabilities living with friends and family because they can't afford a place of their own. But the official statistics show us that over 5,000 people with disabilities are currently on the housing list in Ireland. Now, people with disabilities do get some priority because they obviously often require specialized housing. All the same, many of these people have been on the housing list for between 5 to 10 years. And we know that many people say of the hidden homeless, people living with family and friends, simply stopped applying for the housing list. They saw people waiting 10 years and decided it wasn't worth the bother of applying for the housing list in the first time. So these numbers don't reflect the true need for housing within Ireland. In addition to those on the housing list, and there's some overlap in these categories, nearly 3,000 people in Ireland still live in congregated settings. That's residential care, institutionalized care, people who aren't living as part of the wider community. In addition to those people, over 1,300 people under 65 are currently placed in nursing homes. Now these are nursing homes obviously intended for elderly people, but people with disabilities can wind up in them when they can't find appropriate housing. So some cases, it's people who were placed in them because there was no residential spot and their disability was considered, their disability didn't allow them to enter housing because there wasn't any appropriate housing. People have also wound up in nursing homes if, say, they've acquired disability and they couldn't leave hospital to their own home because it wasn't adapted. And so they were told their only option to leave hospital was to go into nursing home. And because of the way the Irish system is set up, once you are in a nursing home, it can be very difficult to leave. Current Irish law requires the government must pay for your place in a nursing home if you're placed there, but they don't have to pay to help you get out. So they don't have to pay to adapt your house or find you a new house. So some of these people have managed to leave, but it remains a crisis of people inappropriately placed in these living conditions. And all that's reflective again of the broader lack of accessible housing, the lack of housing in general, the difficulty with very high rents when you're living on disability allowance. So all of that are all huge issues in Ireland right now. So as far as our work on housing, DFI works a lot with the Department of Housing and housing agencies, and we have had, as I said, some wins. We engage a lot with, we put in submissions on the housing adaptation grant, which it's the amount that the government will pay for the housing adaptation grant hasn't changed in over a decade, despite obviously increased construction costs and increased inflation. We participated in a campaign to change Part M. So Part M is the building regulations in Ireland around accessible buildings. They currently often require that new housing be visitable, but not livable by people with disabilities, which means there's less housing that people with disabilities can live in. We have a report coming out soon that we worked on with Citizens Information on issues around housing and disability that will be launched early December. So if you're interested in this topic, that's a really in-depth look at it. And we've always engaged a lot with the Oireachtas around these issues. All right, so the last issue I will look at is the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or UNCRPD. So DFI advocated a lot for its ratification, and it was finally ratified in Ireland in the spring of 2018. Ireland was the last state in the EU to ratify the convention. So it was done, but it could have been done a lot sooner than that. Ireland has not yet ratified the optional protocol to the convention that would allow people to bring complaints under certain circumstances to the UN. Ireland's currently implementing the UNCRPD. Work on that has been a little uneven. So there are some good things. The fact that the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act passed in 2015, that will, when fully commenced, eliminate adult wards of the court and adult guardianship in Ireland, allowing people to, so people will no longer have their ability to make decisions taken away from them legally. They'll be supported to make their own decisions. While it's good that it's passed, it's not good that it hasn't commenced after many years. And the commencement was just delayed again a couple of weeks ago. On the other hand, the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2016 had a lot of kind of small formal changes to make Ireland more disability friendly. Things like going back through old legislation and removing the word lunatic, changing the definition of reasonable accommodation in certain cases, making IREC the official monitor to oversee the convention. All of those were in that bill. And that bill stalled and lapsed in the last government, and so was never passed, meaning a lot of small formal procedures were never put into place. So yeah, there's good and bad happening around the implementation of the convention. So yeah, on the UNCRPD, DFI inputs to the Oireachtas, whatever requested. We participate in the disability strategy group and the National Disability Implementation Strategy group. We provide training for local authorities on the UNCRPD. We've also provided training for other government bodies when requested. As I said, we work on the EU level. We include the UNCRPD in most of our advocacy work. Obviously, issues of poverty, issues of housing are also issues of the UNCRPD. We do work with IREC around the public sector duty. And we recently joined a group to advocate for the gender equality referendums, as gender equality is also an issue of the UNCRPD. So that's the kind of work we do on the national level. Obviously, I could talk about it for days. That's a quick run through of the work we do. And we have had a few wins in the past few years. A lot of this is just persistence, to be honest. So in employment, a lot of DFIs highlighting the problems with employment, the low employment, helped to lead to the Make Work Pay report. And that suggested a number of improvements in Ireland, some of which have been implemented. Things like people don't lose their free transport card the moment they get a job. That way, if the job doesn't work out, they don't have to reapply for it. They still have the card. It raised the earnings disregard for the medical card so that people on medical card can work more hours a week if they do get a job without losing their medical card. So it has started to make changes in Irish laws that make it easier for people with disabilities to get and retain jobs. Although significant barriers do remain, it is an improvement. On poverty, DFI's constant advocacy around that helped lead to that Cost of Disability Commission that produced the report that I discussed earlier, showing how much it costs to have a disability. And recently in the last budget, there was a recognition of the cost of disability and a one-off payment of 500 euros. Obviously, we would prefer an ongoing payment, but it is the first recognition in a budget of disability having a cost and the government needing to offset that. So we're hopeful that we can build on that. On housing, the housing strategy for disabled people that has most recently come in, the one that will run through 2027, has been much more ambitious than previous attempts. So DFI's advocacy has fed into that as well. So we're hopeful again that, like with the Make Work Pay and the cost of disability, that we're seeing small improvements in that area and more recognition of the problems people with disabilities in particular face in those areas. So as far as what international organizations might be able to take away from this, and I'm also happy to answer any questions at the end. It's just part of it is that just Ireland's grappling with many of the same very basic problems that you see abroad. Problems of people being able to afford food and housing, and problems of people living in poverty. So yeah, so a lot of our approaches might also work for other groups. Like I said, for the wins we've had, for the success around housing, cost of disability, a lot of it has just been a lot of persistence and a lot of patience. Being willing to raise the same issue over and over again, getting our organizations to raise it over and over again, until it finally seems to enter the government consciousness that yes, this is an issue. We've been talking about it for, in some cases, more than a decade. So a lot of what DFI's experience is just patience until you finally talk to the right person, or it finally kind of gets through, to just be willing to continually raise an issue and continually hammer at it until you see some small progress, and then really celebrating that so the government can see that, you know, this is something that you really want and something that, you know, they will get returns on acting on those issues. So yeah, that's all I have. As I said, I'm happy to answer questions after the presentations are finished, and I hope this is helpful. I will stop sharing now.
Great, thanks so much for that, Meredith. And I think your points that came up a few times on both patience and persistence have very, very much resonated. So a reminder, if anyone does have any questions for Meredith on that presentation, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll come to them a little later. So now taking us back to the international perspective, and with the mantra of third time lucky, Clement, welcome back. The floor is yours, and Dóchas is going to share the slides on your behalf, and we'll see how we go.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off my camera. I think that this will be better for the following. Thank you. I was talking about our advocacy and disability in inclusion approach. And as you can see in this chart, we have, we have 4 elements. Hello?
Clement, we can still hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The circle presents the strategic articulation of our intervention. And it's, as you can see, in 4 parts. The one in red color is the adaptation to local advocacy context. And then the organizational and technical capacity building to support stakeholders. And following, we have the main advocacy objective we are pursuing in blueprint, and the key advocacy activities. This is in amber color. Now, I would like to elaborate on the adaptation to local advocacy context, which is in red color. The chart explains what we do, and it's to let you know that we are not operating like in common advocacy processes with these communities, because as I said previously, it would be too heavy for them, too sophisticated or too expensive. And so in this context, you must know that there is a relatively weak capacity of these organizations, and a sound tradition of consultation, dialogue, and pooling of resources, and a participatory social and socio-professional framework of development. That is what characterizes these organizations and this context. And given this context, advocacy initiated by the project and led by local stakeholders is preceded by, now in green, is preceded by organizational and technical capacity building. This consists in setting up technical commissions, like task forces or technical teams, and awareness raising, training, and seminars, because even communities or public authorities are sometimes weak in knowing the real context of the issues we are struggling with. And then we support the development of work plans after awareness raising and trainings and seminars, and also participatory elaboration of local advocacy strategies. This process makes it possible to have actors at local level to challenge and influence the public authorities on government's commitments in connecting with the realization of the rights to inclusive quality education for all children. Now, speaking of our main advocacy objective, these are as follows: encourage the inclusion of inclusive education in initial training of the implementation of recommendations and commitments of the actors and the state, and ensure the integration of children with disability into the school system. Next. Excuse me, you can go back. Yes. Now, for the advocacy activities, we have awareness raising and seeking formal commitments, consultation and activity planning between stakeholders, celebration of the International Day of African Child and International Days of Disabled Persons. So these are the activities, the main activities we have developed with these communities. And now we can go next. Now let me present to you the synthesis of our achievements. The first part of achievements is about inclusion and education opportunities for children with disabilities. All these interventions have made it possible to create more inclusive community and school environments, and to strengthen children's equitable access to quality inclusive education, and in and even beyond the project areas. First, we can see the first achievement is that in 2016, more than 94% of students say that school provides an environment of gender equality, and 57.1% of students believe that the school is truly inclusive for them. And this rate is nil in the control schools of the same area. The number of children with disability regularly enrolled in schools in the project area has grown exceptionally, from 17 at the start of the project in 2016 to 396 in 2016. Excuse me, the start of the project was in 2012, and now we have 396 children with disabilities in 2016, and at the end of the project in 2002, we have 728 children with disability enrolled in our schools in this area. And as for the inclusive methodologies adopted by teachers, after the training, seminars, and awareness raising, 100% of children with disabilities say that teaching methods are safe and friendly to them in 2022. This rate was 89 in the previous evaluation in 2016. EQUIP project also has radically modified the social representation of children with disabilities, leading to a considerable evaluation of these children by their own parents and those around them in the society, in school, and in the larger society. Next, please. And now for the second part of achievement we can present is a social mobilization and local political changes. The action of EQUIP project and particularly its advocacy action have brought about qualitative change in social mobilization around the issue of inclusive education. As example, you can see the creation of communal commissions for inclusive education, chaired by the mayor himself in each municipality we cover, and bringing together those responsible for education, health, social action, the community-based rehabilitation organization, disabled people organization, parents-teacher associations in the 7 target municipalities. And also we have the participatory creation of code of conduct for a truly promotion of inclusion practices at school with the overall local stakeholders in the 137 primary school we are working in. And this is a particular change in this area because in the past, nothing like this happened. And third, the school statistics at regional level, and I can add that even at national level now include the situation, I mean statistics of a student with disability, whereas no information was previously available on these children in the official statistics at national level and at regional level. The municipal authorities mobilized all the municipal council members to carry out especially a general census of children with disability not attending schools. This was without any financial support from the project. It was only on their own budget support. And this is an unprecedented example of commitment of public authorities and local municipalities. Next, please. We want to share now some lessons learned and perspectives. The first one is that disability care is not only about material and medical care in a low-income society. We know now that change in the behavior of those around people with disability constitute a strong basis for changing policies at local level, even at a national level. And secondly, the activities carried out successfully and in an inclusive manner with young people with disabilities show their strong willingness to quickly play their role in society, intellectually, culturally, and emotionally. And to finish this part, the perspectives that we are looking for another project with the same actors in this project area, which will consolidate the result of the current EQUIP project at a higher educational level of the same participants. we want now to strengthen more elaborated advocacy at the national level. Thank you, everyone, for your attention, and I'm so sorry for what happened at the first tentative of this presentation.
Thanks to you, Clement, and really no need to apologize. We're really grateful for your, as Meredith would say, patience and persistence in coming back to the virtual room and sharing your presentation. So thank you so much. Fergal, I'll hand over to you now. You can guide us through some Q&A, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Grace, and thanks Clement and Meredith for really interesting and stimulating presentations. Mabub from CBM Ireland has thankfully kicked us off with a really good question, one that was in the back of my mind, and this is for both Clement and Meredith. At what level do you include the organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs or DPOs? Do you work with disability movements in your advocacy work? And he thanks you both for your presentations. Does anyone want to take that first?
I can go first if you'd like.
Thanks.
We include them at various levels. So some of our member orgs are DPOs, and so obviously they participate in DFI's work the same as all of our other members. They are a minority of our membership, but they are included. In addition, we belong to some alliances that include DPOs. For instance, DFI is part of the Dóchas Disability group, which is a group of organizations, both traditional and DPOs, who work together to advocate for the Dóchas. And obviously many of our events and such would be open to the public, and that would include DPOs who attend as well. So we work with DPOs in different places, where they choose to join DFI or they join organizations that we're a member of. Some DPOs see DFI as a bit stodgy and old-fashioned and choose not to work much with us, which is also obviously their own choice. DFI does do a lot of work, in addition to DPOs, with local activists. So individual activists who choose to work outside of DPOs often benefit from DFI's support. One example would obviously be coming up this Saturday on the International Day of People with Disabilities is the Purple Lights campaign, where buildings across Ireland light up purple to raise awareness of people with disabilities and celebrate them. That campaign was started by an individual activist, and DFI provided support to him to reach out to local authorities and reach out to individuals. We do work with DPOs on different levels, where they want to engage with us, where they don't want to engage with us, we don't interfere. We also do a lot of work with local activists, helping people to organize on a local and national level as well.
Thanks, Meredith. Anything to add to that, Clement? Clement might...
Can I step in there? Clement, you're back, please. Would you add about working with DPOs, community-based organizations of people with disability?
Sorry?
Could you also contribute and outline the work that we do in Plan Burkina, where we work with organizations of people with disability in our project area?
Yes, thank you. At all levels of our work, we are working with DPOs, and this begin with children with disabilities themselves. In school governments are children organization we set up in each school, and this includes children with disabilities members. And at school level, we are working with them, helping them to elaborate working plans and inclusive activities inside schools, and also to have, as I said, organizing events like children with disabilities, or not children with disabilities, the days of person with disabilities and African Children Days. They are involved in the organization of these days, and they gain opportunities to sensitize their peer members and communities on the issues they are facing about their lives in community. And we are also working with a larger organization which is called community-based rehabilitation organization, which is a representation of national level organization, but at local level, it's kind of team that is working with governmental structures and also social organization and communities to help people with disabilities to have medical care, social support, and also education. At any activities, we are involving them, and we are always talking with the responsible, and the activity plans at municipality levels are part of what they have planned before. Deidre?
Yeah, thanks a million, Clement. There's another question here in the chat for you from Susan. She says, "Thanks both so much for the presentations. The data on disability in your presentation, Clement, looks quite low in your first slide. Does your project also include advocacy on data collection on disability?"
Yes.
Do you want to take that one, Clement?
Yes. I didn't really.
Yeah, I'll ask it again. The question is that the data on disability in your first slide looks quite low. Does your project also include advocacy on data collection related to disabilities?
Yes. Data collection at the Ministry of Education is yearly activities, and all data on school children and education statistics are collected yearly at between October and November. And what we have seen is that no information were collected about children with disability, and even about their organizations or their needs or inclusive education. And this is part of our advocacy action. And now we can see that in official statistics, we can see data about children with disability, and even at national level, we have data collected.
Okay, great. I think we probably have time for one last question, and it's just coming in on the chat from Lauren. Thanks for the presentation, Meredith and Clement. Really impressive and impactful session. I want to ask you about how do your programs consider gender and disability, and do you consult women's groups and organizations? Meredith, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. So DFI has, especially the past couple of years, been working on our intersectional work and trying to become a more intersectional organization. I know one of our staff did a lot of work couple of years ago on the fact that many women's shelters are inaccessible to people with physical disabilities, which is an obvious issue. And so she did a lot of work on raising that issue and helping women's groups to address that issue. More recently, we joined a coalition of organizations that are working to advocate for the gender equality referendums proposed by the Citizens Assembly. And so with that group, we're working obviously on that group with groups like the National Women's Council, because gender equality is one of the articles of the UN CRPD, so it does fall within our work. So yeah, it's an area that we're not perfect on yet, but we're certainly working to improve intersectionality around issues like gender, race, sexual orientation, and all of those.
Great, thanks so much. Clement?
Yes, gender and equality is a part of our approach, and particularly in the training of teachers, we have modules about gender transformative education, and also our consultancy and working group are all composed of 50% of women. And in school children organizations, we have we also try to keep gender parity in the composition of the commissions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for your questions. I think we're probably out of time, but thanks for engaging so thoughtfully on the two presentations. I'm going to hand back to you now, Grace.
Great, thanks Fergal, and again thanks to everyone for your very insightful questions. So just to wrap us up, once again a very, very big thanks to our speakers, Clement and Meredith. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your valuable work and insights with us. A big thanks also to Flocta Phelan from DFI, Deirdre Murray from Plan, and Morgan Clark and the others at Dóchas for all of their work in the background and in supporting this webinar. It's really appreciated. And most importantly, thanks to all of you who joined here today to engage in this conversation, to ask these questions and to share your insights from all around the world. So we will communicate on future webinars in the new year, and it would be really great to have you and your colleagues join us for those also. But in the meantime, thanks again for joining us and have a good rest of your day ahead. Take care, everyone.